Forget everything you learned in your school books. This isn't a parade of Norse heroes or a boring medieval history lesson. Here begins a descent into the savage heart of a culture that forged its destiny with blood, steel, and indomitable will. The Vikings weren't caricatures. They were architects of fear, creators of weapons so brutal that history chose to ignore them. On this journey, we'll dust off 7 instruments of war designed not only to kill, but to mark every fight with an eternal echo of pain and power. Prepare to discover the true face of Viking combat. The one that burns, cuts, and makes no apologies. Before starting this video, remember to subscribe and like. Forget the horned helmets, the shining swords, and the warriors who look like they stepped off a medieval catwalk. What you've been told about the Vikings is a lie well polished by centuries of romanticism and cinema. The truth is much rawer, more visceral, and much more interesting. The Vikings weren't fairy tale heroes. They were survivors in a world that didn't forgive weakness. And their weapons weren't decorative. They were extensions of their will, designed to kill with terrifying efficiency. Hollywood sold us a stylized image, choreographed battles, swords gleaming in the sun, and warriors seemingly dancing on the battlefield. But the reality was different. In the frozen north, where every day could be the last, there was no room for elegance. Viking weapons were tools of war, born of brutal ingenuity and necessity. Nothing was ornamental. Everything had a purpose. And that purpose was to survive, or prevent the enemy from doing so. Imagine a warrior covered in mud, sweat, and blood, wielding a bearded axe with an asymmetrical blade. He's not looking to show off. He's looking to hook your shield, pull your arm, and slash your chest open in a single movement. There's no choreography. There's chaos. There's precision. There's death. And that's just the beginning. The Norse sagas, those that still whisper from the darkest corners of history, don't speak of shining swords. They speak of spears that scythe as they emerge, of knives that are never put away, of shields that strike before they protect. They speak of warriors who knew that every battle could be their last, and that therefore every weapon must be lethal, swift, and ruthless. This chapter isn't an introduction. It's a warning. What you're about to discover isn't found in textbooks or movies. These are the weapons that shook Europe, the ones used when there was no room for error. The ones that go unexplained because their very existence is uncomfortable. Because they reveal that history isn't always noble. Sometimes it's brutal. And the Vikings knew this better than anyone. When a Viking prepared for battle, he didn't choose a weapon like any other tool. He chose an extension of himself. Something that not only cut, but spoke for him. Something that shouted his will to live, to dominate, to stand firm. And among those weapons, some were so common they went unnoticed, until you saw them in action. The skigox, for example, looked like a simple axe. But its elongated beard, that curve that descended toward the handle, wasn't decoration. It was strategy. With it, a warrior could hook his enemy's shield, pull it, unbalance it, and in the same movement, open its chest with the upper edge. It was a dance of death, performed with one hand while the other held the shield. And it wasn't just for killing. It cut wood, dismantled structures, and survived daily use. In Viking graves, the skigoxes found bare the scars of war and labor. Because for a Viking, their weapon wasn't just for the battlefield. It was for life. But if the axe was brutal, the seax was intimate. A single-edged knife that everyone carried, always. It didn't matter if you were a peasant, a merchant, or a warrior. The seax hung from the belt, ready to become an instrument of death at any moment. And its long variant, the langseax, was even more feared. With a straight edge measuring over half a meter, it could pierce leather, bone, and even chain mail. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. And most disturbingly, it was everywhere. While swords were kept in peacetime, the seax never left. It was part of the body, part of one's identity. Many bore decorative engravings, symbols that spoke of lineage, beliefs, and power. It wasn't just a blade. It was a statement. And if we're talking about claims, the croxet was one you heard before you saw it. A modified spear with rear-facing hooks, designed so that once it penetrated flesh or muscle, it couldn't come out without tearing something else away. Tissue, nerves, hope. It was a tool of torture and tactics. With its hooks, the Vikings could trap enemy shields, destabilize defensive lines, and open gaps where none should have been. It wasn't common, but when it appeared, fear preceded it. Now, imagine you're in the middle of combat. Chaos surrounds you. Screams, steel, blood. And suddenly, a shield slams into your face. You didn't see it coming. It wasn't a weapon, right? Wrong. For the Vikings, even defense could kill. Their round shields, made of wood reinforced with iron, hid a secret, the metallic humbo in the center. A dome that not only protected the hand, but could also break noses, render unconscious, and pierce light armor. In close combat, where there wasn't room to raise an axe or spear, the shield was the first attack. A blow to the chest, to the face, and then the downward slash. The sagas mention it as a classic technique. And shields found in graves show clear signs of impact. They weren't accessories. They were weapons. They were will. So the next time you think of a Viking, don't picture him with a shining sword and a decorative helmet. Picture him with mud on his face, a seeks on his belt, a skigox in his hand, and a shield ready to strike. Because for them, every tool was an extension of their body. And every fight was an opportunity to prove that brutality could also be art. When a Viking raised his weapon, he wasn't just looking to kill. He was looking to instill fear. And not just any fear, fear that was felt before the first blow, that paralyzed, that made one hesitate. Because in war, terror is a tool as powerful as steel. The Vikings knew this. They designed it. They perfected it. The Edger, that aberration between a spear and an axe, didn't just cut. It whistled. Its side blade, as it cut through the air, emitted a sharp, unmistakable sound. A warning. An omen. Enemies knew that if they heard it, someone was already dead, or about to be. In close formations, the Edger could strike from behind the shield wall, hook, open, shatter. And it did so with a speed that turned novice warriors into lethal threats. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a presence. A symbol. A whisper of death. And then there was the Dane axe. Imposing. Huge. A two-handed axe that wasn't swung, it was unleashed. Its thin, curved blade could split shields, sever limbs, decapitate with a single twist. But the most terrifying thing wasn't its edge. It was its silhouette. When enemies saw a Dane axe waving above Viking heads, they knew chaos was coming, that the line was about to break. That fear had already won before first contact. Because terror doesn't begin with the blow. It begins with the anticipation. The Vikings understood this. They cultivated it. They used it. Every weapon, every technique, every shout on the battlefield was designed to destabilize, to break the will before breaking the body. And that's why many of their weapons weren't just lethal. They were psychological. They were rituals of intimidation. But time, as always, did its work. Many of these weapons were forgotten, relegated to the margins of history, silenced by cleaner, more convenient narratives. The shining swords remained. The bearded axes, the croxets, the seekses, they sank into the dust of the centuries. But they didn't disappear. Because even though the steel rusts, the fear they instilled continues to resonate. In sagas, in tales, in archaeological finds, these weapons still speak. They speak of a time when warfare was brutal, where survival was an art, where every tool had a soul. They were symbols of status, of identity, of power. They weren't decorative. They were statements. And while we remember them as museum pieces today, at one time they were the center of everything. They were the difference between living and dying. So when you think of the Vikings, don't imagine them as movie heroes. Imagine them as what they were, architects of fear, masters of combat, wielders of weapons who not only killed, but left their mark. Because the true legacy isn't in books. It's in the echo of an Edger slicing through the air, in the weight of a falling Dane axe, in the silence that precedes terror. That is the immortal legacy. And today, we have unearthed it. These 7 weapons weren't designed in palaces or drawn by armchair artists. They were born in the cold extremes of necessity, ingenuity, and a deep understanding of what it means to survive. For the Vikings, every blade, every edge, every shield had soul and purpose. They weren't tools of war, they were statements of existence. Today, as we bring them back from obscurity, we don't just remember their shapes, we remember the fire that shaped them. Because in the end, history isn't written with sweet words. It's etched with steel into the bones of time. As always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. See you in the next video.